Really? You have a right to do that?
Why would you not?
Yes, you don't have a right to own
So if I
but you have a right to eat, otherwise you'll die.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Do you have a right to breathe? What about breathing?
These are good questions, right?
Again, I don't think you understand. We're talking about intrinsic behaviors that are required for survival versus the government and humans deciding what we shouldn't have.
I don't think we're speaking past each other. I'm asking what makes them intrinsic. When you say I have a right to eat, okay?
If you don't, you'll die.
If you have if that guy has all the food over there, you no longer have a right to eat.
We're not talking about
Andrew Wilson just handed Tim Pool a philosophical beatdown of epic proportions. Tim Pool fumbles through abstract theories on rights, while Andrew Wilson systematically dismantles his argument piece by piece. This wasn't just a debate. This was a masterclass in intellectual dominance.
government-enshrined protections are not real. Rights that as we know them, are just things that we recognize as things of value to us. So, for instance, I usually define it as simply, you have a right to speak freely. If you're in the middle of the woods and you're buck naked, you can say whatever you want. You have a right to keep in bare arms. Pick up a stick, sharpen it, pointy stick, you can defend yourself. Ain't no one going to stop you. The question is, when you get into conflict with someone else, where is that line drawn? So the reality is, rights are recognized as things that we can and must do to survive and maximize potential.
I think rights are force, and I think that...
You think rights are force?
Government
rights are
protections.
What do you mean rights are
You're
force?
You're talking about government protections.
No, I'm talking about period. I'll explain what I mean. A right, to me, is an entitlement absent duty. That's a right. Okay? You're entitled to it, but you have no duty.
What does that mean?
It means that you have it... So, like, okay...
An entitlement to speak.
Yeah, so if you have a right to own a gun...
To speak.
No, hang on, let me finish. If you have a right to own a gun, do you have a duty to own a gun?
But do you have a duty to speak?
No, you don't have a duty to speak.
If you have a right to vote, do you have a duty to vote?
Right, so it would be an entitlement.
That's your argument.
It's an entitlement,
but
absent a duty.
But you can speak.
Yeah, you can.
And so
until you can't,
the question
until somebody stops you with force.
So you're talking about government restrictions are made up by us as a people.
Just people can adhere to your rights without any form of government. If you're walking down the street and you speak, and a guy turns around and smacks you in the mouth and breaks your jaw, right? He has now used force against whatever this right you think you have to speak. You have no right to do shit except whatever you can enforce. Right. Your mechanism is force, and the mechanism against you is force. And so all rights are is force.
You're talking about government protections, not rights.
No, I'm talking about rights. What is a right?
So it is an intrinsic moral function.
Well, okay. Intrinsic meaning what?
It means if again, I'll try to explain. If you're born and you live in the middle of the woods, there are things you can do. You can hunt for food. You can defend yourself. You can speak freely. Now, what we've done in the United States
unless
is
you're born blind and you can't talk. Right? Then where does your right to speak come from?
You lack the ability to speak, right? But you still have the means by which you are allowed to do it.
Yeah, but what makes it an intrinsic right to be able to do? Like, where does this idea come from, other than you axiomatically kind of just say, you say because I can do something, I have the right to do something?
It's part of a evolutionary biological structure that resulted in the survival of humanity.
So if I like grab a spear and I can stab somebody with it, I have a right to?
No, that's attacking somebody. That's violating.
Yeah, but other than an axiom of you shouldn't do that because I just don't feel like you should, what makes it intrinsic that I don't do that?
That you don't go and kill another person?
Yeah. So
the way I view rights would be things that and again, there's a debate over what rights are.
Yeah, let's start with that. What are they?
No. So there, it's honestly difficult to define, but it is certain moral structures or.
I would say axioms. Would you agree with that? Just an axiom. So like you have inalienable rights from God according to the Constitution. This is an axiomatic principle. It means this is our like philosophical starting point is that we have these.
I would put it as things that were required or greatly beneficial to the survival of an individual that we greatly benefit.
I agree. We benefit. I just don't know what makes them intrinsic or like you're born with them or something like this, other than we just kind of agree to it.
This is where Tim Pool really starts to unravel. Like, what does he even mean by we just kind of agree to it? That's the most non-answer I've ever heard. And Andrew Wilson is basically forcing Tim to admit that his entire premise is built on vague philosophical musings with no real foundation. I don't know about you guys, but if your argument hinges on we just kind of agree to it, then yeah, you're losing that debate.
So I think the restrictions we kind of agree to. And some people might view some things as rights and other things not as rights. Mm-hmm. Like the left thinks healthcare is a human right, which makes literally no sense.
No sense.
But in terms of your ability to speak, you can walk around, you can speak. To defend yourself, you can pick up a stick, you can defend yourself.
But this goes back to the same argument. I can grab a spear and murder somebody. I can do that. Why don't I have a right to do that?
Because you are now causing harm to another person, which is a detriment.
But why is that valuable?
Why are other people valuable?
Yeah, well, why would that be an intrinsic value? So, like, I can
one would result in the end of humanity,
instance,
and one results in the expansion of humanity.
Well, no, both can result in the expansion of humanity.
Right, but absolutely not. You're completely wrong.
No, I'm completely right.
You are wrong. Self-defense can result in expansion of humanity if you're using destruction for the purpose of ending something that is destructive. But if you are wantonly going around murdering people, you're actively reducing and harming humanity.
Well, okay, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't expand humanity by harming people. There's
so
nations
the argument
that do
of
this all the
self-defense
time.
is there are things that we believe we must be able to do for the betterment and survival of humanity.
Yeah, but when I'm asking you this question, right, I'm asking the foundation from which you say, I have the right to speak or write.
We need to be able to in order to survive.
You because you need to do something.
So
I'm not sure how that means you have a right to it, though.
Okay, so speech is not
Like you
just
have to
saying
eat.
words.
You have a right to eat?
Yes, 100%.
Really? You have a right to do that?
Why would you?
Yes,
not
you don't have a right to own.
So if I have,
but you have a right to eat, otherwise you'll die.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Do you have a right to breathe? What about breathing?
These are good questions. Right?
Again, I don't think you understand. We're talking about intrinsic behaviors that are required for survival versus the government and humans deciding what we shouldn't have.
I don't think we're
laws.
speaking past each other. I'm asking what makes them intrinsic. When you say I have a right to eat, okay?
If you don't, you'll die.
If you have if that guy has all the food over there, you no longer have a right to eat.
We're not talking about your right to steal from others. If you are standing in the woods by yourself, if you're standing in the woods by yourself, eat that mushroom.
Okay, got it. You can eat the mushroom. But what makes it a right to eat that mushroom, and what makes it not a right for guy standing next to the mushroom to say, I have a gun and I don't want you to eat that mushroom?
You're now once again talking about laws and restrictions.
Yeah, okay, but my whole theory is that rights themselves are force. And that's all they ever are. It's just your ability to use force to do thing you want to do.
I think you're just making
you call that a right.
I call rights things that are essential to the survival of humanity.
So you have a right to your heart beating and your blood flowing and to blink and to...
Yes.
Okay, so if you
so now you misunderstand because once again you're talking about government again.
And there it is. Andrew Wilson just caught Tim Pool in a loop. Tim keeps circling back to government as if that's the core of the discussion, but Andrew Wilson isn't letting him off the hook. He's hammering home the fact that rights aren't some magical government decree. They're rooted in survival and necessity. Tim is basically stuck on repeat, and Andrew Wilson is just running circles around him at this point.
How is his government? It doesn't need to be government.
If you are standing in the middle of the woods and your heart is beating, your heart has a right to beat. If your heart fails and you die, you died. If you're making an argument that someone should or should not be allowed to do something is an entirely human social construct.
I agree.
Right. I'm saying that the reason we have protections of rights is because we've determined certain things are required for the reasonable survival and expansion of humanity.
Yeah, I agree. We agree to those things, and we act as though they're rights.
And the Bill of Rights,
but I don't think rights themselves exist.
The Bill of Rights is a recognition of certain things that we do for the betterment of survival that must be protected from government. Now, if you want to argue the amendments in the Bill of Rights are nonsensical, fine. If you want to have a moral argument or philosophical argument about what is required or intrinsic to the survival of humanity, by all means have that argument. But rights do exist. It just means some you might not agree with and some you might think aren't. Those are philosophical debates.
Yeah, but when you say exist, right? Do you mean outside of your brain they exist, or do they only exist as a construction of your mind where you say, I have a right to do X?
If we observe creatures in the wild, we will see them required to do things to survive.
Yeah, okay, so...
If you inhibit those things, they will die.
So if just rights
protect
to you...
those things...
So the rights to you just mean things which are a requirement for your existence?
And typically we define them as such because they transcend the basic obvious things like breathing and drinking water.
Owning a gun isn't a requirement to your existence.
No, defending yourself is.
Yeah, but
if a bear comes and you're in the middle of the woods and you don't have the ability to defend yourself, you cease to exist and humans cease to exist. So humans do defend themselves. Then as human society, we've decided this should be protected, otherwise humans will cease to exist.
Yeah, but why? Okay, but this makes no sense, right? So if all right is to you, Tim, is thing X which is necessary for the survival of a man, in this case blinking and breathing and eating and pooping and whatever, the right to poop shall not be under, because you have a right to do that because it's like something you need to do to be alive.
So, I mean, yeah, this wasn't even close. Andrew Wilson absolutely obliterated Tim Pool in this debate. Tim kept trying to redefine rights in a way that made no sense, while Andrew Wilson stayed locked in, exposing every contradiction and logical inconsistency. This wasn't just a debate, it was a complete annihilation. If Tim Pool thought he was going to hold his ground, well, let's just say Andrew Wilson had other plans.